Genesis. Shalom. The Bible in Genesis chapter 7 tells us concerning Noah. In Hebrew, you pronounce it Noah with a kasal ha at the end, Noah. But in English, Noah, it's pronounced Noah. Story of Noah is found in the Bible, Genesis 7. We are told that Noah, in his time, the earth was corrupt. Everyone was doing bad things, acting in an improper manner. They were sinning. They were upsetting the basis of civilization, which is basic morality and correct behavior. So God had decided to destroy the earth with water. He commanded Noah to build an ark, a boat, a large boat-like structure in which he was to place all the animals of the earth, in which was to place a couple, a male and female, of all the animals of the earth. And this is what he was told to do. We read in Genesis 7:4, for after 7 more days I will send rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and I'll blot out from the face of the land every living thing that I have made. And Noah did according to all that the Lord had commanded him. Now Noah was 600 years old when the flood of water came upon the earth. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives, and Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. From these 3 sons were destined to emerge all the peoples of the earth. All races of the earth are somehow or other connected to these 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. It's usually accepted that Ham was the ancestor of the dark peoples, Japheth of the colored peoples, the Mongoloid peoples, the Shem of the European type peoples. It's not exactly the case. There can be an overlap in some cases. But nevertheless, it is interesting to note that the 3 main racial groups of the earth are somehow or other connected to these 3 sons. And Noah was told to go into the ark together with his sons and the wives of his sons and his wife because of the water of the flood, of clean animals and animals that are not clean, and birds and everything that creeps on the ground. They went into the ark to Noah by 2s, male and female, as God commanded Noah. It came about after the 7 days that the water of the flood came upon the earth in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, On the same day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open. The fountains of the great deep, that is underground containments of water that were under the earth, they burst forth. In addition to the rain, there were underground sources of water that came forth. The fountains of the great deep burst open. The floodgates of the sky were opened. So both from above and below, water came over the earth. The rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. So that was a flood. Noah and his sons and the son and his family, they survived the flood. And from them, mankind continued. And all of mankind alive today, according to the Bible, are descended from one or other of the descendants of Noah. And so that's fair enough. And we'll go into this story a little bit. Some people recently have been attempting to degrade the acceptability of the story. And it's not so. So we'll go through some of the claims that have been made against the flood story. We'll discuss them. First of all, it's written in the Bible. If it's written in the Bible, it's true. Okay? You have a problem with that? Fair enough. But that is the way it is. It's written in the Bible, that is what there was. The question may be what exactly is written in the Bible, which is something else. So the measurements, the Bible also gives the measurements for the size of the flood, for the size of the ark, of the ship, the boat that was to be built, and translated into modern measurements. It is these measurements are considered too great. They're too large. And they say, and since the ship, the Ark of the Covenant, was built out of wood covered with pitch, with tar-like substance, it's not, would not be feasible. It's not accepted. So maybe the ark was not meant to be a ship that could navigate the waters. It was meant to be a receptacle that could contain Noah and the animals, and could stay afloat. So it didn't have to be didn't need such a sophisticated design, right? Only to withstand the elements and stay afloat. Didn't have to go anywhere, just where it would be taken. And the similar ships of comparable size, it is claimed that had been made. The Chinese report history, the report concerning treasure ships. And some of these ships were very large, very great, possibly almost the size of the ark. So, and these reports appear to be reliable, but historians and others doubt them because no such ships were made anywhere in the West, and they don't know if the Chinese had the technological prowess, the technological abilities of the Chinese were enough to make ships of that size. Carthaginians did have very large ships. Carthaginians were, in the sense of Phoenicians, set themselves up in North Africa, and they did have large ships, and we found large ships, Carthaginian ships, very large ships, the remains of them, at about half the size of Noah's ship, about half the size of the ark. And reports in Carthaginian records said that they had other ships that were even larger than those that have been found. So we're getting there. And the ancient peoples had abilities. They made things, they curated things. We find, archaeologists find things that we don't know how they were made, and we doubt if we could make them now in the same way or as good as they made them in the past. So the same could apply to the ability of being able to make gigantic ships. They could take in a large number of passengers. That's all it would need. It would need somebody with the sufficient technical abilities to make ships that were as large as ships that were once made. And we have proof that they were able to make ships that were half the size, and also historical records that they also made ships that were much larger than those that have been found. So it's a possibility. And that's all we need. Also, it's been asked, how could Noah feed the animals and keep them alive for at least half a year? 40 days of rain, and then another good few months of waiting around until they could be let out of the ark. So all that time he had to feed them. So we don't know. He possibly took in some food and possibly he may have been able to cause the animals to hibernate. Many animals go to sleep for the months of winter. They go to sleep for the months of winter, and all the winter they are sleeping or in a state of hibernating, somewhere between sleeping and being half awake. So perhaps he could have induced that in all of his passengers. It's also been asked that it says that he took in two pair of all animals that existed. So how could they all fit on the ark? Another question. So we don't know, but it could be that he didn't have to take in exactly every single type, every single kind. He took in a general ancestor of the kinds we know. The animals adjust and animals change. We have all kinds of animals. And animals that relate to each other sometimes branch off from one another. For instance, in Australia you have marsupials, so-called marsupials. Marsupials, animals that give birth in a kind of pouch. And most marsupials are found in Australia, some in New Guinea, and here and there in South America. But at one stage, all the animals in Australia were marsupials. And archaeologists, and then you have kangaroos, and you have wombats, and you have all different creatures like that. And archaeologists find the remains of many more animals, marsupials that looked and acted like rats, like giant bears, like dogs, like hippopotamus, all kinds of animals that we know from elsewhere, the only difference being that they were marsupials. And all marsupials are considered to be one kind, and that is they derive from one ancestor. And this may be doubted. You may say that perhaps no, perhaps they were normal kinds, perhaps they were normal animals, like bears and hippopotamuses and so on, who just taken on themselves this marsupial feature. I mean, what's the big deal? And either way, whether this or that is not so, animals can change and do adapt. So we can accept the principle that it took in one prototype, general prototype of certain animals, and from that all present-day animals derive. So it's still a large number, but it's not beyond the realm of possibility. Another point is that we have the same kind of plants and animals in different continents. How could they have got there if all the animals were taken away? If the flood waters came down and took away all the animals on Earth? How is it today that everywhere we go we find plants and animals? They're supposed to have been destroyed in the flood. And maybe the animals that came out of the ark repopulated them. But how could they have travelled across the distances to get there? So that's a question, possibly a valid question, but we We find this in nature. We find animals moving from one place to another, from one continent to another, even today. But it brings, and also apart from that, we also have the principle of Pangaea. Pangaea is there having been a supercontinent, that all the continents of the earth were one big landmass bunched together. And you can see this in the continents. They fit, when you cut out the shapes of the continents and you put them together like a jigsaw puzzle, they fit into each other. South America fits into Africa. Northwest Africa fits into North America. The Antarctica fits into Africa. Australia fits into the Antarctica. India fits into both Africa and Antarctica, and so on. The continents may be bunched up together. And this concept is known as Pangaea. And at some stage it broke apart. In Genesis 10 it says, this is the account, speaking of the descendants of Noah. It says this is the account of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's sons, who themselves had sons after the flood. And it goes on, the Japhethites, the sons of Japheth, and the sons of Ham, and the sons of Shem. And after reaching Shem, it goes on and gives the genealogy of the sons of Shem. And it says, sons of Shem, Elam, Ashur, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. The sons of Aram, Uz, Hul, Gether, and Meshech. Arphaxad was the father of Shelah, Shelah the father of Eber. 2 sons were born to Eber. One was named Peleg, because in his time the earth was divided. And his brother was named Joktan. So we hear that in his time the earth was divided. In about 2004, in the year 2004 BCE, Peleg also is, the word Peleg itself means divided or separated. So there are those who have taken the concept of Pangea and applied it to the case of Peleg, and they suggest that this is referring to that originally there were all the continents were bunched together. In time of Peleg, they separated and moved apart. And this is feasible. It could have happened. And it would also answer the question of how the same similar animals spread out to the same places, because it all comes from the same source. And evidence for the existence of Pangea, of one big landmass, may be found not only from the fact that the different continents fit together like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, but also we find fossils in the continents concerned, which indicate that those areas had indeed once had been in conjunction with each other, joined to each other. Also, the orientation of magnetic minerals in the rocks also indicate that it had been once together. And if they were once together, the whole idea of the flood becomes much easier to explain. That they were all together, everything happened within one country, the whole world was within one country, and the water came out due to some type of cosmic movements and covered the whole of the earth, apart from those who were in the ark, were in the ship of Noah. And all over the earth we have reports, we have traditions, different people have traditions of this same event taking place. And these accounts have the same features, that all the earth more or less, that all the earth had gone along the wrong path, and the God, or the gods, because pagan people also had these accounts, were angry with them, and they decided to repopulate the earth, and they took a, a holy man, and they enabled him to build an ark, and he put the animals in the ark, and he was saved from the flood. You find such stories in the legends of Mesopotamia, Utnapishtim and Gilgamesh, in the Greek legends of Deucalion, and other sources. Also, the Australian Aborigines have myths similar to those concerning Noah and the flood. Also, those of North America and Amerindians said such stories. So we find these stories all over the earth. Another claim against the possibility of a flood says there would not have been enough water for the flood to take place, and it could not cover every mountain and so on. Well, the Bible says that when the flood came, it came about because the floodgates of the sky were open, the rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and in addition to that, all the flood fountains of the great deep burst open, that there was great deal of water under the earth, and this burst forward and came out and covered the earth. If you accept the principle of Pangaea, of all the continents having been together, so this is feasible. Also, you should know that there is more water than land on the earth. There's more water than land on the earth. At that time, there would have been a room for even more land on the earth than there is now. Nowadays, we have continents and sea, water and land interspersed between the great land masses. And the water is of a weak consistency than the earth. And therefore the water is higher, is actually higher than the earth in the middle of the oceans. And if all the landmass would have been together, such as in Pangaea, it would have been even more so. So there is no problem of not backing sufficient water to bring the flood about. And this water would have covered all of the Earth's surface. It would not matter if it did not, just as long as it covered all the world, all the surface of the world where humans were to be found. But it did. But there's no problem for it having. It doesn't have to be that way. There's no problem with it being sufficient to cover all of the earth. Also, I have the rainbow. The rainbow is placed in the sky as a sign of a covenant. Then the flood will not take place again. God said this is a sign of the covenant. Genesis 9:12. This is the sign of the covenant which I make between me and you, and every living creature that is with you, all successive generations. I set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of a covenant between me and the earth. It shall come about when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the earth below will be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant, which is between me and every living creature and you, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. Never again shall the water become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the cloud, I will look upon it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. Now, the rainbow is caused due to the refraction, the breaking up of light patterns, of rays of light in the raindrops. And therefore can be argued that it was always that way, but perhaps it wasn't. Perhaps for some reason or other it was not always that way. And maybe it is something that with the changing of circumstances that was connected with how the flood came about. It became that way. The rainbow is an outcome of physical reality and not optics, a physical phenomenon. And this could have changed after the flood. And therefore would have been a sign of what had happened previously. God had made a pact with the earth that he would not destroy the earth again through a flood. Another claim that is sometimes made is that we have history records, historical records from Assyria, from other places, going back all the way beyond the time of the flood. And there's no records of flood having taken place. So this is not so, because just the opposite. We have records and traditions of flood having taken place. And the way they calculate history and the way history is written, they are mistaken. For instance, Sargon the Great of Akkad of Assyria is written up as having founded the Akkadian dynasty of Akkad. She continued for a few hundred years after his death, until his empire was conquered by the Gutians in around 2100 BCE, the time of the flood. So how could the time of the flood have taken place if we had other things going on? So it's simple, they don't know. They don't know. Sargon the Great of Akkad lived at 2100 BCE. Or if he lived in around 700 BCE, there's a claim being made that everything concerning Sargon the Great of Akkad is the same person as Sargon, the king of Assyria, who lived around 700 BCE or later, and he was written down, and things written down about him are those later attributed to someone else who never existed. Chronology of ancient times has to be adapted, has to be revised. So therefore, claims from chronology are not acceptable. So those are some of the answers we have. The ark was very large. It was only twice as large as ships that did exist at that time. And ships, according to our findings, and there are reports of ships being even larger having existed. So maybe they weren't as large as the ark was, but they weren't that far off it. Feeding the animals was not a difficulty. You had to have found some way to put them to sleep, to tranquilize them, as nature itself does during the period of hibernation for many creatures. He had room for all the creatures, since the only creatures who went in were the prototypes for other creatures who came after them. The families, the forerunners They were the animals that went in. Also, physically, the flood taking place, it's much easier to conceptualize if we accept the concept of Pangaea, that all the continents were bunched together and only separated much later. And now this concept has been known for some time. Brit-Am or Deluge, 1527, 1598, and others after him brought forward this idea. It's been going around for centuries. Alfred Wegener in 1880, 1913, he provided more of a scientific basis, conceptualization of the notion. And this seems to have been confirmed by present-day scientific findings, or at least its possibility has been accepted. And this makes the concept of the flood having taken place much more easier to accept. We also have the traditions of different peoples, numerous different peoples all over the earth, in Africa, North America, amongst the ancient Greeks, amongst the ancient Mesopotamians, amongst numerous different kingdoms concerning the flood, and they all tell more or less the same story. And there was enough water for the flood to have taken place, to have covered all of the earth. And we don't know enough about ancient history to refute the possibility, because the whole of ancient history needs to be revised. It could be that there was a period of time in which the flood took place. So thank you, may the Lord God of Israel bless you.